Let's have this discussion now. Miss South Africa for 2021, that's Lalela Mswane's decision to attend the Miss Universe pageant that was hosted in Israel has sparked a charged debate about whether or not it was even morally permissible for her to do so, given that long-standing conflict between Israel and Palestine. Mswane nonetheless finished third at that competition, and upon her arrival back in South Africa, she actually spoke to my colleague Xoli Mgambi about perhaps some of the criticism she's received. Take a look at her response.
Do you understand what the objections were about against your participation in this event?
I'd like to think people viewed it as me being in support of Israel in the whole Israel-Palestinian war, which is beyond me. It's a conflict that commenced years ago, hundreds of years ago, something that's so complex. And I actually often wonder if the people that are so against me, even participating themselves, know why they're so against me attending. Because I've always said, like, if the pageant was held in Palestine, I would have gone without any shadow of a doubt.
Needless to say, that response also garnered a lot of reaction. Let's try and unpack what is rightly a complex situation now. Bringing our guest, Roshan Dadoo, is with the Palestine Solidarity Alliance. Also joining our discussion is Olga from the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel. To both our guests, thanks very much indeed for your time. It's great to have you on the program. Roshan, I wonder if I can begin by just gauging your response to what we've just heard Lalela say. Essentially, the thrust of her defense is she wasn't there when the Israel-Palestine war started, and so she can't be expected really to take a stance insofar as that is concerned. Why is that not good enough?
Well, I think we have to understand that Israel is now universally acknowledged as being an apartheid state. And that's not just a word to fling around. It's a universal legal term that refers to severe discriminatory oppression. And it's outlined in the International Convention on Apartheid, which states in Article 2 that the crime of apartheid shall include similar policies and practices of racial segregation and discrimination as practiced in Southern Africa, and shall apply to the following inhuman acts committed for the purpose of establishing and maintaining domination by one racial group of persons over any other racial group of persons and systematically oppressing them. Now, Palestinians have been saying this for decades, but more recently this year, the most well-known Israeli human rights organization, B'Tselem, published a report saying that Israel was committing crimes of apartheid, and following that, the Human Rights Watch report entitled Israeli Authorities and the Crimes of Apartheid and Persecution came out. And I don't think anyone can say that Human Rights Watch, an international organization with that standing and that reputation, would be putting out a report saying that Israel is an apartheid state if it did not have in its 160 pages evidence that it is indeed committing crimes of apartheid. And I think the important thing is to remember in our struggle, when we called for a boycott of apartheid South Africa, when we called for disinvestment and sanctions, and we did that to support the struggle and the resistance of the people of South Africa against the apartheid regime. And we used that to mobilize international support and put pressure on the apartheid regime. And it worked. And I think it's morally incumbent, politically and ethically incumbent on a post-apartheid South Africa to do the same thing when a country is determined by international law as committing crimes of apartheid. And so we fully supported the decision of our government on this matter, that they would withdraw any government support for Lalela Mswane to go to Israel and participate in this glamorous pageant, when the Palestinian women's organizations were calling on us to say no and calling on her to say no, please don't go and glamorize and make beautiful an ugly crime of apartheid.
Sure.
So I think that's really our starting point.
Sure.
And I'm sorry that Miss South Africa, or Miss Apartheid South Africa, as some have been calling her, doesn't seem to realize that everyone has agency and we all have a role to play in ensuring that systems of apartheid are dismantled wherever they appear in the world.
Sure. Olga, let me bring you into this discussion. I mean, you know, the temptation is to allow this to become a conversation defending either Israel or Palestine, but I'm interested in the nuance here as well. And Roshan has touched on that in some respects. this idea of agency, that individuals have autonomy and the decisions they make either promote or speak out against certain things. You are representing the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel. Speak to me about that organization, but also the acknowledgement of this issue around agency and being able to drive certain messages through that.
If you'll give me just 2 seconds, I have my little one, as you can see, he's screaming in the background.
Oh, shame. Okay. That's perfectly fine.
Thank you. The wonders of being a mom on the go. His favorite TV show has just now disappeared. But if you'll allow me to explain what the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel is, because I can kind of do that while I'm trying to navigate this. The timing is ridiculous.
Look, it's completely okay. It's a charged debate. I imagine your child wants to chime in as well, in some respects, in their own unique way. So it's fine. You can take care of that if you need to, by the way. There's absolutely no pressure. This is what comes with working in a global health crisis. Believe it or not, we've been here several
working
times.
From home. Thank you. I appreciate that. So the Institute for Black working moms is still having to make some impact as we're here. So the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel is an organization that has its roots in the United States, but it also has branches across Africa. And our purpose is to ensure that there is education with regards to the whole Israel conflict, but also the relationship between different groupings, especially Africans, in relation to what is really going on. My colleague is correct in that there has been an outcry. There have been many articles, many publications that have been put out there calling Israel an apartheid state. But if I were to call this a computer, just because I call it a computer doesn't make it a computer. It's an iPhone. We need to look at the characteristics of what we're looking at and then say, does it fall within the particular definitions or does it not? I am still, when I've appeared on News Africa, still to get the answer whenever I have the discussion as to what makes Israel an apartheid state. Despite what people say out there, there are multiple organizations that have come against the likes of Human Rights Watch, who, interestingly enough, if you are to read their document that my colleague referenced, in the opening statements, they actually say that, well, you know what, and I'm paraphrasing it, but this is the gist of what they said. You know what, this is not exactly what what apartheid South Africa was, but for purposes of this, we're now going to say that it is. There is no apartheid happening in Israel. Are there challenges with regards to the Palestinian people and the Israelis? Yes, there are, but we need to understand why those challenges exist and then address them. And for so long as we continue to call Israel an apartheid state, we are causing a smoke screen. And so not then calling to account the likes of Hamas, as well as the likes of the Palestinian Authority, who, by the way, their president is now celebrating the 18th year of a 4-year term. They are the true oppressors of the Palestinian people. So when Lalela Mswane got caught up in this furor, unfortunately, it was such a political hotbait, her dreams and her desire to just compete with other women across the world, instead of giving her, instead of empowering her agency, instead of saying, you know, we understand, this is something that you've pursued, this is your dream, this is what you need to do, because there is no basis even for the call to boycott. Our government turned its back on her. Our government, instead of empowering this wonderful woman, has embraced the likes of Hamas, who is a terrorist organization, Hamas, who is responsible for the deaths of many innocent Palestinian women as well as children in Gaza. And later on, if the discussion allows, I can allude to a march that happened in 2019 where the Palestinian people themselves, women included, were on the streets marching and saying, give us liberty from these people who are oppressing us. But where were the likes, and I say so very respectfully, of the Palestinian solidarity movements? Where were they marching in solidarity with these women?
Right, right. You know, again, my real concern, even with this discussion, was following through on trying to decode the very complex circumstances around this long-standing war. And if you'll indulge me, I'm trying to do something a bit more nuanced here and speak about what Lalela could have done in her own way, given her defense. Part of what she said in defending herself is, this war is beyond me. And what I'm trying to unpack here is that enough of a defense for someone who has a considerable amount of influence and at the very least is able to send out a strong message about how we should be viewing this particular conflict? Your take very quickly, Olga?
I would say her stance was correct because, one, this thing is very, very complex, and two, it's based on a lie. And I appreciate the fact that you're not wanting to go into that aspect, but it is unfair for us then to call for a woman to say, don't go there, and the premise for which we're calling her not to go there doesn't exist. I think that what she actually did was very powerful because she went, She saw for herself. She saw the diversity, the integration. Now we can pick up the conversations as a result of her saying, you know what? I understand this is what people are saying, but let's go see for ourselves. And this is one of the things that the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel encourages. Don't just accept things because they're said. Let's investigate. Let's ask the questions. So I think that she used her agency in a very powerful way to say that the broader aspect of this, the political aspect of this is beyond me. But as a people, how can we have dialogue? How can we have these discussions? And then hopefully from the ground up have an impact and create some change.
Right. Roshan, let me bring you back into the discussion. Plenty being said. Among the questions being asked by Olga is, what makes Israel an apartheid state? I imagine you want to respond to that, as well as some of the other remarks she's made.
Yes, well, as I said, and I'm not sure why someone from a group who is with the name Solidarity with Israel would be considered any more impartial than anyone else, and why their word would go above international law, above what I read out, which is written in the International Convention, includes similar policies and practices of racial segregation as happened under apartheid here. Why, again, the very detailed reports, the Human Rights Watch report, the B'Tselem report, why someone who is clearly partisan towards Israel would be considered an impartial word more than what UN and international organizations that aren't partial have to say on the matter. But I think if we look at some of the details and some of the reasons why Archbishop Tutu has called the situation in Palestine as worse than apartheid in South Africa, I mean, just in May this year, we saw the storming by the Israeli occupation forces and the tear gas and rubber bullets into the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. I mean, what sort of normal state does that? We also saw then the bombing of Gaza, which was already declared an open-air prison by the UN. I mean, 256 Palestinians, including 66 children, were killed just in that one attack in May this year, where they also were bombing, I mean, because they were bombing civilian buildings and an international media house. The head of the COVID response in the main hospital in Gaza City was killed in this bombings. I mean, this is not the behavior of a normal state, but even more so is the systematic and systemic oppression, the restriction of movement, the arbitrary arrests. There are currently 200, possibly more now, children in Israeli jails. And you recall in the 80s in particular, in apartheid South Africa, when children were being arrested, small children. I mean, really, is that a way a normal state behaves? The detention without trial that we remember well from South African apartheid, and then also shooting to maim and to kill, which is extrajudicial killing under international law and is happening repeatedly in the West Bank in particular. I mean, we saw our own head of mission in Ramallah, the charge d'affaires, being harassed by Israeli occupation forces when he was out with farmers trying to harvest olives. They were harassing the farmers, and even though he was a diplomat from our mission, they started on him and started harassing him. Why can't people farm their own land where they have even some land left, given the increasing numbers of settlements, and a new settlement, huge settlement project has just been approved and will be built up there in Palestinian land.
Yeah.
We saw, or we heard, in fact, in South Africa from Muna El-Ked just last month, who's one of the Times 100 People of the Year, if you want to talk about what individuals can do, simply by trying to put out there in the world to record what's happening in her own home, where settlers are coming and just taking over a legally owned home that her family has lived in for ages, is just taken over by people while the Israeli occupation forces stand there doing nothing. Is this a normal country? Does this not remind us in many ways of some of the atrocities that happened here? It's not exactly the same. It says in the convention, similar types of oppression. So I think, you know, it's really not a contestation to say that Israel is an apartheid state any longer.
Got you.
And really, you know, it was founded as a settler colonial state on Palestinian land, in fact, by terrorists, groups like the Irgun that were fighting the British then, when it was a British mandate, and then the Nakba, which dispossessed and murdered the indigenous Palestinian population in order to establish the state of Israel.
All right, Roshan,
so
let me bring Olga back into the discussion if I can.
Similar to what we had under apartheid here.
Got you, loud and clear. Olga, I imagine part of what needs to happen now is we need to ascertain what Lalela can do next in order to ensure that this continues to be a constructive discussion. The disagreements are clear and obvious. I could have preempted what they are even at the start of this conversation. I'm interested nonetheless in trying to figure out what someone in Lalela's position can do moving forward in order at the very least to bridge a gap, because the notion that she can do nothing, I think we'll all agree, is also just simply inaccurate. It's not true.
It is definitely inaccurate, and I'm grateful, although unfortunately because of time, I understand that I'm not going to have an opportunity to address all of the different examples that my colleague here raised, and my son acting up again. So it is correct that there are similarities or alluded similarities with regards to apartheid Israel, but if you look at that, context is very important. So the examples that she's raising, if I can just touch on two of them. The storming, she says, of the Israeli government or the Israeli soldiers in Al-Aqsa Mosque in May, that didn't just happen because they really nearly wanted to do so. There were actually firebombs that were being thrown down from Palestinian people on there, and so the quote-unquote raid was a measure of security to stop that from happening. A lot of times people on the other side don't want to bring in the context. They don't tell the story of the fact that it is not the Palestinian people that are indigenous to the land. It is the Jewish people. They were in the land over 3,000 years ago. The Palestinian people, as we know them as a grouping by that name, that terminology only came into existence in around 1961 as a result of Yasser Arafat. Now, we can go on and on because there's context that if you really go deep into it, there's proper understanding. And this is where that I think that Lalela has an amazing opportunity, if that is what she chooses to, because she's Miss South African, yes, she's found herself in this fray, is to get people around and educate. Again, I'm going to say, just because something is called something does not mean that it is that. Context is important. My colleague spoke about the numbers of Palestinian children as well as innocent civilians that were killed in Gaza in the war that happened in May. Yes, there were people that were killed. There were also people that were killed in Israel, but they were killed in Gaza as a result of the fact that Hamas, when it launches its rockets, it launches rockets from homes, from civilian places, so that if there's a retaliation by Israel, and which country would not retaliate in order to defend its people, then those that unfortunately the innocent get caught up in that. The reason why there's a smaller number on the Israeli side is because Israel takes care of its people. It does not put its innocent people in the firing line. It has this amazing system called the Iron Dome, as a result of which many people are not killed, but there is still trauma that is there. So there is a lot to unpack. We need to have a discussion. We need to sit down around the table. There needs to be education. Who is indigenous to the land? Again, it is not the Palestinian people. Israel is not a colonizer state. My colleague referenced the Nakba that happened in 1948. That was Israel's declaration of independence when the people came back home. The mandate for Palestine, we had other people that were living in their land that colonized them. Palestine was offered, or rather the Arabs, who were then called prior to, like I said, 1961, 1963, when the terminology Palestinian in relation to the Arabs living in the land came into being, they were offered land. But because they don't want the Jewish state to exist, if you look at the charter of Hamas, which is the governing authority in Gaza, they talk about no Jews. They talk about no Israel. Their ultimate goal is not even just living together, but it is the demise of the Jewish people. So let's sit down around the table. Let's understand what the conflict is about. And if Lalela would want to engage with the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel, with other organizations, and we sit down, compare the evidence, and be truthful, we would be more than happy to facilitate that.
All right. I imagine this is just one of many discussions to be had around this incredibly complex situation. And sadly, that's all the time TV allows us. But, again, there's certainly something to be said about the role that a Miss South Africa can do around an issue as contentious as this. For now, let me thank you for both your insights. I really do appreciate it. Olga Washington is with the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel. Also joining that discussion is Roshan Dadoo, who's with Palestine Solidarity Alliance. To both of you, once again, thanks very much indeed.